A 10-year-old girl standing at the edge of a river. A 27-year-old soldier kneeling before her father. A story that became the most famous love story in American history. None of it happened. She was not a princess. She was not in love. She was a child. And the man the world remembers as her great romance was old enough to be her father. For over 400 years, her story has been told by the people who took her. They made her a symbol of cooperation between two worlds. They turned her kidnapping into a love story. They animated her as a Disney princess with flowing hair and a body drawn for adults. They named ships after her, and hotels, and a coal mine in West Virginia. But her bones are missing. The church where she was buried caught fire over 300 years ago. Her remains were shoveled into a mass grave with dozens of strangers. No one marked which bones were hers. No DNA test has ever been performed on her remains because no one knows which remains are hers. For over a century, her story was told without her voice. DNA says otherwise, not from her body, which is lost, but from the bones of the men who lived alongside her at the same colonial settlement, and from the more than 100,000 people alive today who carry her bloodline without knowing the truth about who she really was. This is the story of the most famous woman in early American history. Not the version painted on movie screens, the version written in colonial records, in ship manifests, in a letter from a man who needed her alive, and in the silence of a burned church in a small English town where she was buried far from home. Her name was not the one the world remembers. That name was a childhood nickname. It meant something close to playful one or mischievous one. Her formal name was different. Her secret name, the one her family kept private because they believed it held spiritual power, was never shared with the English. She was born roughly 430 years ago along the banks of a river in what is now the state of Virginia. Her father was the paramount chief of a confederation of roughly 30 tribes, controlling a territory that stretched across most of the coastal region. He had dozens of wives and many children. She was one of the youngest. The world she was born into was not the wilderness the English described. The Powhatan Confederacy was a political network governing thousands of people with established farming, fishing, and hunting grounds, diplomatic protocols and trade routes stretching hundreds of miles inland. Her father maintained power through a combination of military strength, marriage alliances, and tribute payments from subordinate chiefs. She was roughly 10 or 11 years old when 3 ships carrying 104 English men and boys arrived at the mouth of a river in the spring of 1607. They built a fort on a swampy island and called the settlement after their king. Within months, the settlement was failing. Disease, starvation, contaminated water from the brackish river. More than half the original colonists perished in the first year. The English needed food. The Powhatan people had it. The relationship that followed was not a love story. It was a negotiation between a dying colony and the most powerful leader in the region, conducted partly through the presence of a child who visited the fort and occasionally brought food. The English soldier who later claimed she saved his life did not mention the incident in his first published account. He wrote a detailed report of his time in the colony in 1608, the year after it allegedly happened. The rescue does not appear. It was not until 1624, 7 years after her passing, that he published the story of being dragged before her father and rescued at the last moment by a young girl who threw her body over his. Some historians believe the event, if it happened at all, was a ceremonial adoption ritual, a common practice among Algonquian-speaking peoples. The English soldier may have misunderstood a ritual that was meant to welcome him into the Confederation, not execute him. Others believe he simply invented the story after she became famous in England to attach his name to hers. Either way, she was a child. He was a grown man. There was no romance. There was never a romance. The animated film that taught a generation of children otherwise was released in 1995. It remains one of the most historically inaccurate films ever produced by the studio that made it. The real story is harder to watch. In 1613, when she was roughly 17 years old, an English captain learned that she was living with a neighbouring tribe. He devised a plan to kidnap her as leverage in an ongoing conflict between the English and her father. He enlisted the help of a local chief and his wife, who lured her onto an English ship. Once aboard, she was told she would not be leaving. She was being held as ransom for the return of English prisoners and stolen weapons. Her father returned some of the prisoners and some of the weapons. The English said it was not enough. They kept her. She was held for over a year. During her captivity, she was converted to Christianity. She was baptized and given the English name Rebecca. She was taught English customs, English dress, English manners. Whether this was voluntary or coerced depends on which account you read. None of the surviving accounts were written by her. During her captivity, she met a tobacco farmer. He was a widower. His first wife had perished during the voyage to the colony. He wrote a letter to the colonial governor asking permission to marry the captive. The letter survives. It speaks of his own spiritual struggle and his desire to convert her fully to the Christian faith. It does not read like a love letter. It reads like a business proposal. They married in the spring of 1614. She was roughly 18. The marriage ended the conflict between the English and her father. A period of relative peace followed, known to historians as the Peace of Pocahontas. A son was born in January of 1615. He was given the name Thomas. In 1616, the family sailed to England. She was presented to English society as a converted native, proof that the colonial project was succeeding in civilizing the indigenous population. She was paraded at court events, introduced to the Queen, and displayed as a curiosity. According to one account, she encountered the English soldier during her time in London. She refused to speak to him. She turned her face away. Whether from anger, grief, or something else, she would not look at the man the world would later call her Great Love. In the spring of 1617, the family boarded a ship to return to Virginia. She fell ill before the vessel reached the open sea. She was taken ashore at a town called Gravesend on the Thames River east of London. She was roughly 21 years old when she passed. The cause was never determined. Theories include smallpox, pneumonia, tuberculosis, and dysentery. One account by her sister, who had accompanied her to England, suggests she was well before a final dinner and fell violently ill afterwards. Some modern writers have raised the possibility of poisoning, though no evidence exists. She was buried in the chancel of the parish church, a high-status location reserved for important individuals. Her husband and son continued toward the ship, but the boy fell ill at the next port. The father left him in England in the care of relatives and sailed on to Virginia alone. She never returned home. Her son did not know her. Over 100 years later, in 1727, the church burned to the ground. When it was rebuilt, the bones beneath the old floor were gathered and reburied in a common grave in the churchyard. No individual remains were marked. No record was kept of which bones belonged to which body. Her skeleton was mixed with those of English merchants, sailors, and townspeople. The specific bones of the most famous Native American woman in history were lost. They have never been recovered. In 1923, an American businessman from Chicago arrived in Gravesend and began digging up the churchyard. claiming he was her descendant and had the right to take her remains back to America. The town was horrified. The police were called. The man was stopped. He was not, in fact, her descendant. In 1958, a bronze statue was erected in the churchyard. It shows her in English dress. It does not show her as she looked at home. It shows her as the English wanted to remember her. Her son, Thomas, was raised in England until roughly the age of 20. He returned to Virginia around 1635. He married a woman from the colonial gentry. Their daughter married a colonel. That colonel's descendants multiplied through the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries into one of the largest documented family networks in American history. Today, more than 100,000 people are estimated to carry her bloodline. They include 2 First Ladies of the United States. One was the wife of a wartime president. The other was the wife of a president who served in the 1980s. They include a duchess. They include senators, judges, military officers, and ordinary families scattered across the American South and beyond. For generations, claiming descent from her was a badge of honor in Virginia society. Families kept meticulous records. Genealogical societies were formed. The Bowling family, which traces its line directly to her grandson, maintained registers that have been verified and cross-checked for over 2 centuries. But the irony of this pride was never lost on the Powhatan people. The same colonial society that had kidnapped their ancestor, renamed her, and displayed her as a trophy, now celebrated her bloodline as proof of their own nobility. Her descendants claimed her legacy, while the tribes she came from were pushed from their land, denied recognition, and written out of the history books. It was not until 2018, over 400 years after the founding of the colony, that 6 Virginia tribes, including the direct descendants of her father's confederation, received federal recognition from the United States government. For centuries, the woman who had been used to justify colonization was celebrated while the people she came from were legally invisible. For over 400 years, the story of who she really was has been told by the people who took her. DNA says otherwise. Not through a single study, not through a single skeleton, but through the accumulated weight of genetic evidence from colonial-era remains, commercial ancestry tests, and the living memory of Powhatan descendants who never needed a laboratory to know who their ancestor was. Several modern descendants have taken commercial DNA tests and found small but consistent traces of indigenous American ancestry in their genomes, roughly 1% or less after so many generations. The signal is faint, but it is there. A genetic whisper from a woman who was taken from her home, renamed, converted, displayed, and buried in foreign soil 400 years ago. No direct DNA from her body has ever been tested. Her bones are in a mass grave. They cannot be distinguished from those around them. The technology to identify her exists. In 2024, a team from the Smithsonian and Harvard successfully extracted ancient DNA from the skeletons of English colonists buried in the church at the same colonial settlement where she lived. The study, published in the journal Antiquity, was the first to use ancient DNA for identification at that site. The results were remarkable. The team identified 2 high-status English colonists through mitochondrial DNA matching, and in the process uncovered a 400-year-old family scandal. 2 men buried in the church who were supposed to be from different branches of a prominent family turned out to share the same maternal lineage, revealing an illegitimacy that had been hidden from official records for centuries. The study proved 2 things. First, that 400-year-old colonial DNA can be read. Second, that the results do not always match. what the historical records say. The bones have their own truth, and that truth does not care about reputation. The bones in that church were 400 years old. The bones in the Gravesend churchyard are the same age. The science works, but the bones in Gravesend are mixed. They are commingled. They are unindividuated. There is no coffin to open. There is no marked grave to excavate. There is only a patch of English earth where a woman was placed in 1617 and lost in 1727. If a future excavation were ever permitted at the Gravesend churchyard, and if the commingled remains could be separated, and if ancient DNA could be extracted, it would be possible in theory to identify her. Her mitochondrial lineage would carry markers consistent with Algonquian-speaking populations of the eastern seaboard. Her isotope signatures would reflect a childhood spent eating food grown in the soils of Tidewater, Virginia, not England. But the excavation has never been approved. The church has never been disturbed since the reburial, and no Powhatan tribal authority has requested the remains, in part because the tribes regard her burial, however far from home, as a resting place that should not be disturbed again. She was 10 when the English arrived. She was 17 when they took her. She was 18 when they married her to a widower. She was 21 when she was placed in foreign ground. The animated film shows a woman standing on a cliff, hair blowing in the wind, gazing at a ship full of English adventurers with wonder and excitement. The real girl stood on the bank of a river and watched strangers build a fort on land her father controlled. She brought them corn when they were starving. They repaid her by stealing her, renaming her, and turning her into a poster for colonization. For over 400 years, her story has been told as a romance. DNA says otherwise. The commercial tests of her living descendants show indigenous markers that trace back to the Tidewater region. The bones of the colonists who lived beside her have been identified through ancient DNA at the Smithsonian, but her own bones remain in a patch of English dirt, mixed with strangers, unmarked and unreachable. She has a statue in Gravesend. She has a statue in Jamestown. She has a Disney film and a theme park ride and a coal mine named after her. She does not have a grave. Discovery continues. Thanks for watching. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and turn on notifications. We cover DNA mysteries, ancient forensics, and the cases history tried to forget.